The rain tapped against the windshield like impatient fingers matching the rhythm of Rebecca Taylor's breaking heart. She sat in her car parked outside the elementary school, clutching two pieces of paper that had arrived on the same cruel Thursday. Termination notice from the accounting firm after 8 loyal years. Eviction warning from the landlord who once called her the perfect tenant. The pages trembled in her hands as she allowed herself exactly 3 minutes of tears. All she could spare before Matthew would emerge from those double doors with his dinosaur backpack and questions she wasn't ready to answer. Rebecca wiped her eyes, practiced her smile in the rearview mirror. 37 years old, starting over with nothing but $15,000 in savings and a son who deserved so much more than a mother who couldn't keep it together. Her wedding ring had been pawned months ago, right after Brian left for his 24-year-old yoga instructor. The diamond hadn't been real anyway, a perfect metaphor for the marriage that had crumbled beneath her. The school bell rang and children poured from the building like water breaking through a dam. Matthew appeared to his small face, scanning the parking lot until he found her car. 8 years old, with eyes too serious for his age, shoulders already carrying the weight of a broken home. He climbed into the back seat, buckled himself in with practiced precision. Bad day. Matthew's voice was small but steady, those observant eyes catching the redness around hers. Rebecca adjusted the rearview mirror to meet his gaze. Just a change day, buddy. Sometimes life changes direction when we least expect it. Matthew nodded with the solemn wisdom of children who've already learned that adults don't always tell the whole truth. Are we going to be okay? The question hung between them, heavier than it had any right to be. Rebecca turned in her seat, reached back to squeeze his knee. Always. We're a team, remember? And teams figure things out together. That night, after Matthew had fallen asleep in their small apartment, Rebecca spread newspapers across the kitchen table, scanning classified ads with desperate determination. Housing prices had skyrocketed in their Michigan suburb, making even the most modest rentals impossibly out of reach. Each circle she drew around potential options was crossed out just as quickly. Too expensive, too far from schools, neighborhoods, too dangerous for a single mother and young son. Then she saw it tucked away in the bottom corner of page 12. Historic estate for sale, price reduced, 5,000 plus back taxes, urgent. The address placed it in Oakwood Mills, a rural community about 40 miles from where they currently lived. Rebecca frowned at the suspiciously low price, but curiosity pushed her to dial the number. The real estate agent who answered sounded relieved, as if he'd been waiting months for this call. The Donovan property. Yes, it's still available. 15,000 square feet on 12 acres. Been empty for 25 years. The city's practically giving it away at this point. There must be a catch, Rebecca said, twirling the phone cord around her finger like she used to do as a teenager. A pause on the line too long to be insignificant. It needs work. And there's history. Frank Donovan wasn't exactly beloved in Oakwood Mills, but for someone looking for space and opportunity, well, you won't find a better deal. Rebecca scheduled a viewing for the next day, an unexpected flutter of hope in her chest. That night, she dreamed of wide-open spaces of Matthew running through green fields of a home that couldn't be taken away with a simple piece of paper. Morning brought them to Oakwood Mills, a town that seemed frozen in time with its brick storefronts and ornate Victorian lampposts. The real estate agent, Mr. Peterson, met them at the iron gates that marked the entrance to the Donovan property, his pale complexion and nervous demeanor at odds with his forced cheerfulness. Just so you know, he whispered as he fumbled with the rusty lock, locals have strong opinions about this place. Try not to take it personally. Before Rebecca could ask what he meant, the gates swung open with a groan that seemed to echo through the overgrown property. Beyond stretched a long, winding driveway bordered by once manicured gardens, now claimed by wilderness. And at the end, rising like a sleeping giant against the gray Michigan sky, stood Donovan Mansion. The structure took Rebecca's breath away, not because of its beauty, though traces of former grandeur were evident, but because of its sheer presence. 3 stories of weathered stone and darkened windows, wrap-around porches with peeling paint, and a central tower that pierced the cloudy sky like an accusation. Ivy crawled across its facade like veins on aged hands. Matthew clutched Rebecca's fingers tightly. It looks like a castle from a scary story. Mr. Peterson forced a laugh. Just needs some TLC. The infrastructure is surprisingly sound. Electricity was updated 10 years ago during a previous sale attempt. Plumbing works, though. I wouldn't drink from the taps until they're flushed. Roof was patched 5 years ago. As they approached the house, a small crowd began to gather at the gates. Men and women in work clothes and casual attire watching with undisguised curiosity and something darker that made Rebecca pull Matthew closer to her side. "Don't mind them," Mr. Peterson said, though his quickened pace suggested otherwise. "Small town, not much excitement." Before they reached the front steps, a black SUV pulled up beside them. A man emerged, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair and a tailored suit that screamed authority. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he approached with an outstretched hand. "Walter Blackwood, mayor of Oakwood Mills. I make it a point to personally greet potential investors in our community." Rebecca shook his hand, noting his grip was too tight, too possessive. "Rebecca Taylor, this is my son Matthew." Blackwood's gaze swept over them, lingering on Rebecca's worn coat and Matthew's scuffed shoes. His smile tightened. "Considering the Donovan property, are you bold choice?" "We're just looking," Rebecca replied, straightening her shoulders. Blackwood nodded, though disbelief shadowed his features. "Of course, though I should warn you, this place has baggage. Frank Donovan wasn't just any businessman. There were investigations, allegations. Nothing proven, of course, but people disappeared around him. Weapons were found on the property after he vanished. The last family that tried to move in left after 3 days. The crowd at the gates had grown larger, their whispers carrying on the wind. A woman's voice rose above the others. "Poor lady's gonna waste her money and maybe her life." Laughter rippled through the onlookers. Blackwood's smile widened. "Small towns, you understand. Everyone's a critic." Matthew tugged at Rebecca's sleeve, his voice small but determined. "Mom, they're being mean. Can we go inside now?" Rebecca squeezed his hand, grateful for his courage that bolstered her own. "Yes, we're going inside. Thank you for the welcome, Mayor Blackwood." As they climbed the cracked marble steps, Blackwood called after them. "Just doing my civic duty, Ms. Taylor. This town's been trying to move past the Donovan shadow for 25 years. Would hate to see anyone make a costly mistake." The massive front doors opened with surprising ease, as if the house had been waiting for them. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of light that streamed through grime-covered windows. The grand foyer stretched upward 3 stories to a stained glass dome that filtered the daylight into fragments of blue and amber across the marble floor. For all its neglect, the house retained an undeniable dignity. Ornate woodwork framed doorways and climbed staircases. Tarnished chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks. Even the cracked wallpaper hinted at former opulence, patterns of gold leaf barely visible beneath years of dust. "It's huge," Matthew whispered, his voice echoing slightly. "The main house has 12 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms," Mr. Peterson recited, gaining confidence now that they were away from the crowd. "Library, formal dining room, ballroom, 3 parlors, and a conservatory. The east wing was once used as offices. Basement includes wine cellar storage and a former staff quarters." Rebecca moved through the rooms in a daze, trying to reconcile the grandeur with the absurdly low price. Each space told a story of abandonment. Furniture draped in yellowed sheets like ghosts, bookshelves half empty, as if someone had left in a hurry, a piano with keys stained yellow from age. In what must have been the library, Rebecca ran her fingers along built-in shelves that stretched to the ceiling. "Why is no one living here? Even with the repairs needed, it's worth millions." Mr. Peterson shifted uncomfortably. "Legal complications. After Donovan disappeared, the property got tied up in court battles. By the time the city claimed it for tax purposes, the stories had taken root. No one local will touch it. Out-of-towners buy it, then leave quickly. The city's board just wants it occupied and back on the tax rolls at this point." Matthew had wandered to the window, pressing his face against the glass to look out at the overgrown gardens. "There's a fountain out there, and I think that's a maze made out of bushes." Rebecca joined him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Beyond the immediate grounds, she could see rolling hills, a small forest, and in the distance, a tiny structure that might have been a caretaker's cottage. $5,000 plus about $12,000 in back taxes, Mr. Peterson said quietly. "As is, the city will expedite the paperwork. You could own it by next week." Rebecca's mind raced with possibilities. The space was excessive for just the 2 of them, but she'd always dreamed of opening a haven for children, a place where kids with nowhere else to go could find safety and care. She'd abandoned the idea when her marriage collapsed, but standing here, the dream flickered back to life. "I need to think about it," she said, though something in her heart had already decided. As they completed the tour and headed back to the car, the crowd at the gates had dispersed, leaving only Mayor Blackwood leaning against his SUV with arms crossed. "Well?" he asked, as if entitled to their decision. Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "It has potential." Blackwood laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "Ms. Taylor, let me be direct. That house has eaten people alive, financially and otherwise. A single mother with forgive me for assuming limited resources. You'd be buried before Christmas." Heat flushed Rebecca's cheeks. "Thank you for your concern, Mayor. We'll take it under advisement." As they drove away, Matthew pressed his face against the window, watching the mansion recede into the distance. "Those people were mean, but I liked the house. It felt sweet, like it needs someone to take care of it." Rebecca glanced at her son in the rearview mirror, struck by the simplicity of his perception. "You weren't scared by all those stories." Matthew shrugged. "Grown-ups tell stories about things they don't understand. That's what my teacher says." 2 days later, Rebecca signed the papers. Mr. Peterson seemed both relieved and concerned as he handed over the keys, heavy iron things that belonged in a medieval castle rather than a modern transaction. "The utilities are connected, but you'll want to have everything checked," he advised. "And Ms. Taylor, maybe don't tell too many people in town until you're settled. Just a suggestion." They moved in on a Saturday, their meager possessions barely filling one bedroom of the sprawling mansion. The emptiness echoed around them, but Rebecca felt strangely unburdened. No landlord could evict them now. This was theirs. Their fresh start, their impossible gamble. That first night they camped out in the master bedroom, sleeping bags laid across the bare hardwood floor, a camping lantern between them casting long shadows across the high ceiling. "Do you think there are ghosts?" Matthew asked, as Rebecca tucked him into his sleeping bag. "I think houses remember the people who lived in them," she answered carefully. "But that doesn't make them haunted. It makes them full of stories." Matthew considered this, his face solemn in the lantern light. "Maybe we're part of the house's story now." "Maybe we are." Rebecca smiled, kissing his forehead. "The chapter where everything gets better." Later, with Matthew asleep beside her, Rebecca lay awake listening to the house settle around them. Creaking wood whistling, drafts the occasional scurry of what she hoped were just mice. Normal old house sounds, she told herself. Nothing sinister. Then came the footsteps, distinct and deliberate, crossing the floor above them. Rebecca froze, her heart pounding against her ribs. The master bedroom was on the top floor. There should be nothing above them but attic space. The steps moved slowly, paused, then continued in a measured pace. Rebecca reached for her phone, cursing silently when she saw no signal. She glanced at Matthew, still peacefully asleep, and made a decision. Moving silently, she grabbed the heavy flashlight from their emergency kit and crept to the bedroom door. The hallway stretched before her, moonlight spilling through tall windows and painting silver rectangles on the worn carpet. Rebecca followed the sound, tracking it to a narrow door at the end of the hall that must lead to the attic. The footsteps had stopped. Her hand trembled as she reached for the knob. The door opened with a protracted creak that seemed to echo through the sleeping house. Beyond lay a steep staircase disappearing into darkness. Rebecca aimed her flashlight upward, and its beams slicing through layers of dust and cobwebs. "Hello," she called, her voice smaller than intended. "Is someone there?" Only silence answered. Rebecca climbed 3 steps, the old wood groaning beneath her weight. The flashlight beam caught something moving at the top of the stairs, a shadow retreating further into the attic. Her breath caught. "I've called the police," she lied, voice steadier now. "They're on their way." A sudden gust of wind rattled through the house, and the attic door slammed shut with enough force to knock Rebecca backward. She tumbled down the few steps she'd climbed, landing hard on the hallway floor, the flashlight rolling away and blinking out. Rebecca scrambled to her feet, heart racing, and fled back to the bedroom, where Matthew still slept undisturbed. She pushed a heavy dresser in front of the door with strength born of fear, then spent the remainder of the night sitting upright in her sleeping bag, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. Morning brought sunlight and rationality. Wind through the old house, Rebecca decided. Settling noises magnified by fear and unfamiliarity. She said nothing to Matthew about her midnight adventure, instead focusing on making their new home habitable. They tackled the kitchen first, scrubbing decades of grime from countertops and appliances that had been modern when Reagan was president. Matthew proved surprisingly adept at cleaning, approaching each task with methodical determination. "Mom, look what I found," he called from beneath the sink, emerging with a small tin box rusted at the edges. Inside lay a collection of old keys, each tagged with faded paper labels. Wine cellar, east office, garden shed. Treasure, Matthew declared, eyes bright with excitement. Rebecca smiled, grateful for his ability to find joy in small discoveries. Definitely treasure. Now we can explore even more of our castle. By afternoon, the kitchen was functional enough to prepare a simple lunch. As they ate sandwiches at the massive island counter, a knock at the front door startled them both. Rebecca approached, cautiously peering through the peephole to find a stranger on their porch. An older man with weathered features and a posture that suggested military background or law enforcement. She opened the door just enough to speak through the gap, conscious of Matthew hovering behind her. "Can I help you?" The man's face remained impassive, deep lines around his eyes speaking of decades spent squinting against sun or scrutiny. "Jack Miller. I live in the caretaker's cottage on the east edge of the property." Rebecca blinked in surprise. "Mr. Peterson didn't mention anyone was living here." "Mr. Peterson doesn't know everything about this place." Jack's voice carried the gravel of age and perhaps too many cigarettes. "I've been here since before Donovan disappeared. City lets me stay because someone needs to keep an eye on things." Rebecca hesitated, unsure whether to feel relieved at having a neighbor or concerned about this unexpected presence. "I'm Rebecca Taylor. This is my son, Matthew." Jack nodded once, acknowledging them without warmth. "Saw you moving in. Thought you should know a few things about the house." "Like what?" Matthew piped up, curiosity overriding caution. Jack's gaze shifted to the boy, softening almost imperceptibly. "Like which circuit breakers control what? Where the main water valve is? How to secure the place properly?" He paused, something unreadable flickering across his features. "And that you should be careful. They're still watching this house." A chill crept up Rebecca's spine despite the warm spring day. "Who's watching?" Jack's eyes moved past them, scanning the grand foyer visible through the doorway. "People with interests, old grievances." He returned his attention to Rebecca. "Donovan made enemies. Some of them are still around." Matthew tugged at Rebecca's sleeve. "Is he talking about the mayor?" "He didn't like us being here." A ghost of a smile touched Jack's lips. "Smart kid." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a card with a phone number scrawled in blue ink. "I was a cop for 30 years. Detroit PD, then here after I retired. Call if you need anything. Lock your doors at night." Before Rebecca could respond, Jack turned and walked away, his gait steady despite his age, which she guessed to be late 60s at least. She closed the door, turning the card over in her hand, finding it blank on the reverse. "I like him," Matthew declared. "He looks like the good guy in a detective movie." Rebecca tucked the card into her pocket. "Maybe, but we're still being careful." "Okay, no wandering around outside alone, and don't go into any rooms we haven't checked first." They spent the next few days establishing a routine. Rebecca contacted Matthew's new school, enrolled him for the following week, and began searching for job opportunities. The closest town with significant employment prospects was half an hour away. Not ideal, but manageable. Each night, she fell into exhausted sleep, the physical labor of cleaning and organizing a welcome distraction from her anxieties. On their fourth day, Matthew discovered the bullet. He'd been exploring the overgrown gardens, staying within sight of the kitchen windows, where Rebecca was working. His shout brought her running outside, heart in her throat, until she saw him standing unharmed beside the dry fountain, holding something in his palm. "Look what I found," he exclaimed, holding up a tarnished metal object. Rebecca took it from his hand, recognition turning her blood cold. A bullet casing, old and corroded, but unmistakable. "Where exactly did you find this?" she asked, keeping her voice casual. Matthew pointed to a spot near the base of the fountain. It was just sitting on top of the dirt like someone dropped it recently. Rebecca scanned the gardens, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. The surrounding woods seemed darker now, filled with shadows where anyone could hide and watch. She pocketed the bullet casing. "Let's go inside, buddy. I need your help with something." That evening, after Matthew was asleep, Rebecca searched online for information about Frank Donovan. Local news archives yielded scattered articles, business announcements, charity donations, and then more sinister reports beginning in the late 1990s. Allegations of money laundering connections to organized crime in Detroit, investigations that never led to charges. The final article, dated April 2000, reported Donovan's disappearance. Prominent businessman vanishes amid federal probe. The piece mentioned that weapons had been found on the property, but provided no details about what kind or how many. There was speculation about Donovan fleeing to avoid prosecution or falling victim to criminal associates, but no body had ever been found. A knock at the front door interrupted her research. Rebecca checked the time, nearly 11 p.m., too late for casual visitors. She approached cautiously, flashlight in one hand, phone in the other, despite the lack of reliable signal. "Who is it?" she called through the door. Silence. She peered through the peephole but saw only darkness, as if something was covering the lens from the outside. Rebecca's pulse quickened. She considered her options, then made a decision. "I'm armed and I've called the police," she bluffed loudly. "They'll be here in 3 minutes." Footsteps retreated rapidly from the porch. By the time Rebecca worked up the courage to open the door slightly, whoever had been there was gone. But they had left something behind, an envelope on the welcome mat, her name written across it in angular script. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words, "Leave Donovan's house or else." Rebecca spent another night keeping vigil, this time with a chair propped under her bedroom doorknob, and Matthew sleeping fitfully beside her. By morning, exhaustion had hardened into resolve. She wouldn't be scared away from the only chance she and Matthew had at stability. After dropping Matthew at school for his first day, Rebecca drove to the town hall, a stately brick building dominating Oakwood Mills Main Street. The receptionist's smile faltered when Rebecca gave her name. "I'd like to speak with Mayor Blackwood," Rebecca stated firmly. "Do you have an appointment?" the young woman asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. "No, but it's regarding a threat I received at the Donovan property." The receptionist's eyes widened slightly. She picked up her phone, murmured something Rebecca couldn't hear, then nodded. "The mayor can see you now, down the hall, last door on the right." Blackwood's office reflected the man. Imposing, traditional, meticulously maintained. He stood as Rebecca entered, gesturing to a chair across from his massive oak desk. "Ms. Taylor, settling in, are we?" Rebecca placed the envelope on his desk. "Someone left this at my door last night. I thought the mayor should know that residents are threatening newcomers." Blackwood didn't touch the envelope, merely glanced at it with mild interest. "Small towns have long memories, Miss Taylor. Donovan hurt a lot of people here, took investments from hardworking families, promised returns that never materialized. Some lost everything. That doesn't justify threatening a single mother and her 8-year-old son." Blackwood's expression softened with practiced precision. "Of course not. I'll speak to the sheriff about increasing patrols in your area." He leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "But perhaps this is an opportunity to reconsider. The city would buy back the property at a fair price, say twice what you paid. You could find a nice normal home in a neighborhood with other children for your son." Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "I appreciate the offer, Mayor, but we're staying. That house is our fresh start." Something hardened in Blackwood's eyes there and gone so quickly, Rebecca almost missed it. His smile remained fixed in place. "As you wish, but my door is always open if you change your mind." As Rebecca left the town hall, she noticed people watching her from shop windows, quickly looking away when she met their gaze. The weight of being an outsider pressed down on her shoulders, heavier than the financial burden of the massive house awaiting her return. At school pickup, Matthew climbed into the car with none of his usual energy. "Bad day?" Rebecca asked gently. Matthew stared out the window. "They called our house the murder mansion. Said a man killed people there and buried them in the walls. Said we'll die there too." Rebecca's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "People say mean things when they're afraid of what they don't understand. That house has a history, yes, but we're going to give it a new story. Our story." Matthew nodded but remained quiet. When they pulled up to the mansion, he didn't immediately get out of the car, his gaze fixed on the imposing structure. "What if they're right, Mom? What if it's bad luck to live here?" Rebecca turned in her seat to face him. "I don't believe in luck, good or bad. I believe in choices and consequences. Mr. Donovan might have made bad choices, but that doesn't mean the house is cursed. It's just waiting for someone to love it again. That evening, they worked on Matthew's bedroom, transforming the space with his favorite posters and books. While arranging his clothes in the massive walnut wardrobe, Rebecca found a small piece of paper stuck to the inside of a drawer. Yellowed with age, bearing faded handwriting, "The treasure is behind the portrait." She showed it to Matthew, whose eyes lit up with renewed excitement. "A treasure map like pirates." Rebecca laughed, grateful for the distraction from their difficult day. "Maybe. There are lots of portraits in this house. Should we look for treasure this weekend?" Before Matthew could answer, a crash from downstairs shattered the moment. They froze, listening. Another bang followed, then the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. "Someone's inside," Matthew whispered, eyes wide with fear. Rebecca moved quickly, ushering Matthew into the walk-in closet. "Stay here, don't make a sound. If you hear anything scary, use the emergency button on your watch to call 911. The watch had been a gift from Brian before he left, a child's smartwatch with GPS and emergency calling features. Rebecca had kept the service active despite the expense. "Don't leave me," Matthew pleaded, clinging to her arm. "I'll be right back. I just need to see who it is." Rebecca extricated herself, gently closed the closet door, and grabbed the baseball bat she'd placed under the bed as a precaution. The hallway stretched before her, dark and silent now. Rebecca moved cautiously toward the grand staircase, straining to hear any movement below. The silence felt wrong, too complete, as if the house itself was holding its breath. At the top of the stairs, Rebecca peered down into the foyer. Moonlight streamed through the front windows, illuminating shards of broken glass scattered across the marble floor. The massive mirror that had hung in the entryway now lay in ruins. Movement caught her eye, a shadow detaching itself from deeper shadows crossing the foyer with deliberate steps. Rebecca pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding so loudly she was certain it would give her away. The intruder moved toward the library flashlight beam, sweeping methodically across the room. Rebecca could make out a male figure, tall and broad, dressed in dark clothes with a cap pulled low. She weighed her options. No phone signal meant no police call. Jack Miller's cottage was too far to reach without being seen. She could return to Matthew and hide, but the intruder might find them or take things from the house, things they couldn't afford to replace. Decision made, Rebecca descended the stairs as quietly as possible, keeping to the edge where the wood was less likely to creak. The baseball bat felt inadequate in her hands, but its weight provided some comfort. She reached the bottom just as a second crash came from the library, followed by muffled cursing. The intruder was searching for something, throwing books from shelves, upending furniture. Rebecca positioned herself in the doorway, bat raised. "I've already called the police. They'll be here any minute." The intruder spun around, the flashlight beam momentarily blinding her. Rebecca blinked away the spots in her vision to find herself facing a man in his 30s, face partially obscured by a bandana. "Where is it?" His voice was harsh, demanding. "Where's Donovan's ledger?" Rebecca's mind raced. "I don't know what you're talking about. I just bought this place." The man advanced on her flashlight, still aimed at her face. "Don't play dumb. The mayor said you were working with the old caretaker. Said you're looking for Donovan's stash." Rebecca backed away, bat still raised defensively. "The mayor. What does Blackwood have to do with this?" The intruder lunged suddenly, grabbing for the bat. Rebecca swung instinctively, connecting with his shoulder. He grunted in pain, but managed to wrench the bat from her grasp, sending it clattering across the marble floor. Rebecca turned to run, but the man caught her arm, spinning her around. His fingers dug into her flesh with bruising force. "Last chance, where's the ledger?" Before Rebecca could respond, a small voice called from the top of the stairs, "Would my mom alone?" Matthew stood in his pajamas, small body rigid with terror and determination. The intruder's grip loosened momentarily in surprise. Rebecca seized the opportunity, bringing her knee up sharply between his legs. He doubled over with a howl of pain, and Rebecca broke free. "Run, Matthew! Go to your closet!" she screamed, scrambling toward the fallen bat. The intruder recovered faster than expected, lunging again and catching Rebecca by the hair. She cried out as he yanked her backward. "Your kid's gonna watch what happens to people who don't cooperate," he snarled into her ear. The front door burst open with enough force to crack the frame. Jack Miller stood silhouetted against the night, shotgun raised. "Let her go, now!" Jack's voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The intruder hesitated, then shoved Rebecca forward, nearly sending her sprawling. "This isn't over," he muttered, then bolted toward the rear of the house. Jack moved with surprising speed for his age, crossing to Rebecca in 3 long strides. "Are you hurt?" Rebecca shook her head, though her scalp throbbed and her arm ached where the man had grabbed her. "Matthew," she began, looking toward the stairs. "I'm okay, Mom." Matthew was making his way down cautiously, eyes fixed on Jack's shotgun. Jack lowered the weapon. "You should call the police." "No cell service," Rebecca explained, moving to embrace Matthew tightly. "And the landline isn't connected yet." "Use my phone." Jack produced an ancient flip phone from his pocket. "Though I doubt it'll do much good. Sheriff Thompson is in Blackwood's pocket." Rebecca accepted the phone with shaking hands. "The intruder mentioned the mayor. Said Blackwood told him we were working with you to find something called Donovan's ledger." Jack's expression darkened. "Make the call, then we need to talk." Sheriff Thompson arrived 30 minutes later, a heavy-set man with thinning hair and perpetually narrowed eyes. He took minimal notes, barely glancing at the broken glass or disturbed library. "Probably just kids," he concluded, tucking his notepad away. "These empty old properties attract troublemakers." "Kids," Rebecca repeated incredulously. "A grown man attacked me and threatened my son. He was looking for something specific, a ledger that belonged to Frank Donovan." Thompson's gaze flicked briefly to Jack, who stood silently in the corner shotgun, now hidden from view. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this house has been the subject of rumors and ghost stories for decades. Treasure hunters, thrill seekers. We get calls like this every few years when someone new moves in." "He mentioned Mayor Blackwood," Rebecca pressed. Something shifted in Thompson's expression, a tightening around the eyes, a slight clench of the jaw. "I'm sure you misunderstood. The mayor is a respected member of this community." "I know what I heard." Thompson sighed heavily. "Ms. Taylor moving to a new town can be stressful. Old houses make noises. Imaginations run wild. I'll increase patrols in the area, but I recommend you focus on settling in rather than chasing conspiracy theories." After the sheriff left, an uncomfortable silence settled over the three of them. Matthew had fallen asleep on the sofa, emotionally exhausted from the ordeal. Rebecca covered him with a blanket, then turned to Jack, who remained by the window watching the sheriff's car disappear down the driveway. "You're going to tell me what's really going on here," she said quietly. "What's this ledger, and why does Blackwood think I'm working with you to find it?" Jack's gaze remained fixed on the darkness outside. Frank Donovan kept records of everything: business dealings, investments, payments, including the ones that weren't exactly legal. He finally turned to face her. "Blackwood worked for Donovan back in the day. If that ledger still exists, it could ruin him and several other prominent citizens." Rebecca sank into an armchair, suddenly exhausted. "Why would he think I know anything about it? I didn't even know who Donovan was until a week ago." "Because I'm here." Jack's voice held a note of regret. "I was investigating Donovan before he disappeared. Been watching this house ever since, waiting for someone like you." "Someone like me?" Jack's weathered face softened slightly. "Someone with nothing to lose and everything to gain. Someone who might actually look instead of running away." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "Donovan wasn't just a criminal, Ms. Taylor. He was a complicated man who got in over his head and wanted out. The night he disappeared, he called me. Said he had evidence that would bring down some powerful people. Said he wanted to make things right." Rebecca studied Jack's face, searching for signs of deception, but finding only weary resolve. "And you think this evidence is still in the house after 25 years? "I know it is, just not where." Jack glanced at Matthew's sleeping form. "Your boy is smart, observant. Kids see things adults miss." Rebecca followed his gaze, maternal protectiveness flaring. "I'm not involving my son in some dangerous treasure hunt." "You're already involved." Jack's tone brooked no argument. "Blackwood won't stop. Neither will his associates. You have two choices: run or find the ledger before they do. There's a third option: sell the house back to the city and walk away." Jack shook his head. "Blackwood's offer expires the moment the ledger is found, and he won't let you leave knowing what you now know." Rebecca felt the weight of Jack's words settle around her shoulders like a heavy cloak. She thought of the future she'd imagined in this house, the haven for children, the fresh start, the stability. all now threatened by secrets hidden in its walls. I need time to think, she said finally, and to talk to Matthew. This has to be his choice too. Jack nodded, moving toward the door. I'll be close by tonight. Lock up after me. He paused at the threshold. One more thing. Donovan was fascinated by puzzles' hidden compartments. His father was a master carpenter who taught him the craft. Nothing in this house is quite what it seems. After Jack left, Rebecca secured every door and window, then curled up beside Matthew on the sofa, unwilling to return upstairs where she'd feel vulnerable. Sleep eluded her as she replayed the night's events, weighing options that all seemed to lead to dead ends. Dawn was breaking when Matthew stirred beside her, blinking sleepily. Mom, are the bad guys gone? Rebecca smoothed his tousled hair. Yes, buddy. Mr. Miller helped scare them away. Matthew sat up, rubbing his eyes. I had a dream about the treasure note. There's a big painting in the upstairs hallway. A man standing by a desk. I think that's where we should look. Rebecca hesitated, Jack's warnings echoing in her mind. Yet the innocent excitement in Matthew's eyes made the decision for her. They needed answers, and perhaps the fastest way to find them was to follow the clues Donovan had left behind. Let's have breakfast first, she said, forcing a smile. Treasure hunting requires energy. The portrait hung at the end of the second-floor hallway, a formal painting of a middle-aged man with stern features and calculating eyes. The brass plaque on the frame identified him as Franklin Donovan, 1992. Matthew stood before it, head tilted thoughtfully. He looked sad, like he's keeping a big secret. Rebecca examined the heavy gilt frame, running her fingers along its edges, feeling for any irregularity. Nothing seemed unusual. Maybe there's something behind it, Matthew suggested. Together they carefully lifted the portrait from its hooks. The wall behind was slightly discolored, a perfect rectangle where the painting had protected it from fading. No hidden compartment, no safe, nothing but flat wall. Matthew's disappointment was palpable. The note was wrong. Rebecca replaced the painting, mind working. Or we're interpreting it wrong. It said, behind the portrait, not behind the frame. She studied the image more carefully. The background details the objects surrounding Donovan. He stood beside an ornate desk, one hand resting on a stack of leather-bound books, the other holding what appeared to be a silver letter opener. Behind him was a window showing the very house they now stood in. Look at the books, Rebecca pointed. The titles are actually visible. Matthew pressed closer to the canvas, squinting at the tiny lettering. History of Michigan, Great Lakes Commerce, and his voice rose with excitement. Mom, the bottom one says personal ledger. Rebecca's pulse quickened. And where in the house is this desk? They searched room by room, comparing furniture to the painting. In what must have been Donovan's study, they found it. The same ornate desk, though now dusty and neglected, its once gleaming surface dulled by years of abandonment. Matthew ran his hands over the carved wooden panels, pressing and prodding with childlike determination. There must be a secret button or something. Rebecca examined the desk more methodically, recalling Jack's words about Donovan's fascination with puzzles. The letter opener from the painting was missing, but a silver pen lay in its place. On impulse, she picked it up. The pen was heavier than expected, its surface engraved with intricate patterns. Rebecca turned it in her hands, noticing a small indentation at one end. She pressed it. A soft click came from within the desk. One of the carved rosettes on the front panel popped forward slightly. You did it, Matthew exclaimed, pushing the rosette fully. The entire panel swung outward on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow space behind. Inside was a small leather-bound book, its cover cracked with age. Rebecca removed it with trembling hands, opening to the first page. Neat, precise handwriting filled the lines. Dates, names, amounts. Some entries were in English, others in Italian. Is that the treasure? Matthew asked, peering at the book. Before Rebecca could answer, the sound of breaking glass shattered the morning quiet. Someone was in the house again. Hide, she whispered urgently, tucking the ledger into her waistband and covering it with her shirt. Under the desk now. Matthew scrambled into the knee space of the desk as Rebecca pushed the secret panel closed. She grabbed a heavy paperweight, the only weapon within reach, and positioned herself beside the door. Footsteps approached, multiple sets moving with purpose rather than stealth. Men's voices murmured in the hallway, one of them chillingly familiar. The study is down here. If it's anywhere, it'll be with his personal effects. Mayor Blackwood's distinct tenor carried through the closed door. Rebecca glanced frantically around the room, looking for an escape route. The window was too high, the closet too obvious. The secret compartment in the desk might fit Matthew, but not her. The doorknob turned. Rebecca raised the paperweight heart pounding in her throat. The door swung open to reveal Mayor Blackwood flanked by two men. One she recognized as Sheriff Thompson, the other unfamiliar but equally threatening in his expensive suit and cold eyes. Blackwood's surprise at finding her seemed genuine. "Ms. Taylor, this is unexpected." Rebecca maintained her defensive stance. "Breaking and entering usually is, especially when the mayor does it." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The city retains certain rights to inspect the property. Safety concerns. With an armed escort," Rebecca nodded toward the bulge visible beneath Thompson's jacket. The third man stepped forward, impatience evident in his sharp features. "Enough games. Where's the ledger, lady?" Blackwood placed a restraining hand on his companion's arm. "Andrew, please. Ms. Taylor is a valued new resident." His gaze hardened as it returned to Rebecca, who I'm sure understands the importance of community harmony and mutual cooperation. "I understand breaking the law when I see it," Rebecca replied, grip tightening on the paperweight. Sheriff Thompson sighed heavily. "Ms. Taylor, don't make this difficult. We're conducting an official investigation into missing city property. You can cooperate, or I can arrest you for obstruction." "On what grounds?" "We have reason to believe you're harboring stolen documents," Thompson replied smoothly. "A witness saw you removing items from a hidden compartment in this very desk." Rebecca's blood ran cold. They had been watched. "I haven't stolen anything. This is my house now." "The structure, yes," Blackwood conceded, "but not its contents, particularly items of historical significance to Oakwood Mills." A small sound came from beneath the desk, the faintest shift of weight, a child trying to remain still despite fear. Blackwood's eyes narrowed following the sound. "Is your son here, Miss Taylor? How unfortunate to expose a child to such uncomfortable adult matters." The threat was unmistakable. Rebecca's mind raced, searching for options that wouldn't endanger Matthew. Before she could respond, a new voice joined the confrontation. "Trespassing, breaking and entering, threatening a single mother. Not very mayoral behavior, Walter." Jack Miller stood in the hallway behind them, shotgun held casually but unmistakably ready. The three men turned Thompson's hand, moving toward his concealed weapon. "I wouldn't," Jack advised quietly. "My reaction time's still pretty good for an old man." Blackwood's composure never wavered. "Jack, still playing guardian to Donovan's ghosts, I see. You know obstruction of justice carries serious penalties, especially for ex-law enforcement." "So does corruption," Jack replied evenly. "Which do you think the state police would be more interested in?" A tense silence stretched between them, broken only when Matthew crawled out from his hiding place, unable to bear the suspense any longer. He rushed to Rebecca's side, wrapping his arms around her waist. Blackwood's expression softened into something more dangerous. False concern. "Ms. Taylor, surely you don't want your son involved in this ugliness. There's a simple solution. Hand over the ledger and we'll forget this unpleasantness. You and Matthew can continue living here in peace. I'll even expedite any permits you might need for renovations." Rebecca felt the weight of the book pressed against her back, its secrets suddenly more burden than treasure. She looked down at Matthew's frightened face, then at Jack's steady presence. "There is no ledger," she said finally. "We found an empty compartment, nothing more." Disbelief flashed across Blackwood's features. "Search the room," he ordered his companions. "Tear it apart if necessary." "Not without a warrant," Jack interjected, raising the shotgun slightly. "Now I suggest you gentlemen leave before I contact the state police about this illegal entry." Thompson scoffed. "On what evidence, your word against mine? A disgraced ex-cop versus the county sheriff." Jack smiled thinly. "On video evidence." He nodded toward a small device clipped to his shirt pocket. "Been recording since I walked in. Modern technology. Wonderful thing." Uncertainty flickered across Blackwood's face for the first time. He assessed the situation with calculating eyes, then nodded curtly. "We'll continue this discussion another time, Miss Taylor, when you're feeling more, cooperative." He turned to leave, gesturing for his companions to follow. At the doorway, he paused. "A word of advice. Jack Miller isn't the ally you think he is. Ask him about his real connection to Frank Donovan. Ask him where he was the night Donovan disappeared. The men departed, their footsteps echoing through the quiet house until the front door slammed behind them. Rebecca released the breath she'd been holding, dropping the paperweight onto the desk with a heavy thud. Her legs felt suddenly weak, and she sank into the nearest chair, Matthew still clinging to her side. "Is it true?" she asked Jack, who remained vigilant at the doorway. "Do you really have a recording?" Jack patted his empty shirt pocket. Sometimes the suggestion of evidence is as effective as the evidence itself. He moved into the room, glancing out the window to confirm the men had truly left. "But they'll be back, with warrants, lawyers, whatever it takes." Matthew looked up at Rebecca, his young face solemn with understanding beyond his years. "You lied, Mom. We did find the ledger." Rebecca smoothed his hair, heart aching at having to involve him in such deception. "Sometimes we have to protect what's important, buddy." She removed the book from her waistband and placed it on the desk between them. Jack approached cautiously, as if the ledger might vanish if he moved too quickly. 25 years, he murmured. 25 years I've been looking for this." Rebecca studied his weathered face, Blackwood's parting words echoing in her mind. "What did the mayor mean about your connection to Donovan?" Jack's gaze remained fixed on the ledger. "Blackwood's desperate. He'll say anything to drive a wedge between us." "That's not an answer." Jack finally looked up, his eyes carrying the weight of decades. "Frank Donovan was complicated, Miss Taylor. To some, he was a criminal. To others, a benefactor. To me," he trailed off, something like grief passing across his features. "To you, he was what?" Rebecca pressed. "A case that never closed." Jack reached for the ledger. "May I?" Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. Jack opened the book carefully, fingers tracing the entries with reverence. "Names, dates, amounts," he murmured. "Evidence of every bribe, every payoff, every threat. Blackwood's in here. Thompson, too. Half the city council. Business leaders." He looked up, expression grim. "This is dynamite, Ms. Taylor. Enough to bring down the power structure of this entire town." Matthew, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "Is that why the scary men want it? Because it shows they're bad guys?" Jack nodded. "Exactly, son. Very smart." Rebecca retrieved the ledger from Jack's hands, closing it firmly. "What happens now?" "Now we have choices." Jack straightened, decision evident in his posture. "We can take this to the state police, watch the dominoes fall, or use it as leverage to secure your future here." Or, he hesitated. "Or what? Or keep looking. Because if I know Frank Donovan, this ledger is just the first breadcrumb in a much longer trail." Rebecca glanced at Matthew, then back at the leather-bound book that had already brought danger to their doorstep. "You think there's more?" Jack's expression was unreadable. "I think Frank Donovan left behind more than just evidence of crimes. I think he left a legacy, and I think for whatever reason he meant for someone like you to find it." The summer heat wrapped around Dreamhaven like a blanket, transforming the mansion's perpetually cool interior into something almost comfortable. 6 months had passed since Rebecca and Matthew discovered the ledger, 6 months of cautious renovation and watchful vigilance. The grand entry hall now gleamed with fresh paint, and polished wood windows sparkled in the morning light, and the east wing had been converted into a modest but functional space for children, 5 of them currently ranging from 6 to 10 years old. Rebecca moved through the morning routine with practiced efficiency, preparing snacks and organizing craft supplies. The after-school program had begun tentatively, with only Lisa Martinez attending at first. Elena, her mother, had taken a chance despite the town's whispers, grateful for affordable childcare while she worked double shifts at her restaurant. Word spread quietly among struggling single parents, and slowly the ranks grew. Zach with his perpetual energy twins, Olivia and Owen with their matching freckles, and solemn-eyed Darius, who spoke only when absolutely necessary. Matthew had blossomed among them, transformed from the quiet, withdrawn boy who'd arrived in Oakwood Mills. Now he raced through the halls, with the others telling elaborate stories about secret passages and friendly ghosts that inhabited Dreamhaven. The children believed him implicitly, even when Rebecca gently suggested he was embellishing. The ledger remained hidden, sealed in a waterproof container and buried beneath the floorboards in Rebecca's bedroom. Its secrets lay dormant, but not forgotten, a sword hanging over their tentative peace. Mayor Blackwood had retreated to more subtle tactics, building inspections that found creative violations, tax reassessments that strained Rebecca's modest budget and a persistent campaign of whispers that kept most townspeople at a suspicious distance. Jack Miller had become a fixture at Dreamhaven, arriving each morning to tackle repairs Rebecca couldn't handle alone. The children adored him, especially when he crafted miniature wooden toys during lunch breaks or taught them to identify bird calls in the gardens. His relationship with Rebecca remained complicated, a fragile trust built on shared danger rather than genuine understanding. He still deflected questions about his past with Donovan, and she had stopped asking, prioritizing stability for Matthew above her own curiosity. "Mom, come quick," Matthew's voice echoed from upstairs, excitement rather than fear propelling his words. Rebecca found him in what they dubbed the cloud room, a bedroom on the third floor where the ceiling had been painted with billowing white clouds against cerulean blue. Matthew stood transfixed before the room's fireplace, running his fingers along the ornate carvings of the wooden mantel. "I found another one," he whispered, pressing a nearly invisible seam in the woodwork. The panel slid smoothly sideways, revealing a small niche containing a metal box. Rebecca felt a familiar mixture of dread and anticipation as Matthew extracted their discovery. Whatever secrets Donovan had hidden throughout his home, each revelation seemed to deepen the mystery rather than resolve it. The box opened without resistance, unlike the previous hiding places that had required puzzles or keys. Inside lay a collection of photographs. Frank Donovan through the years, from a young man with ambitious eyes to the stern figure from the portrait. In many, he stood alongside a beautiful dark-haired woman, their expressions progressively less joyful with each passing image. "Is that his wife?" Matthew asked, studying a wedding photo yellowed with age. Rebecca flipped it over, finding a date and two names written in elegant script: Sophia and Frank, 1978. Below the photographs lay a small velvet pouch containing a woman's wedding ring, modest in size but exquisite in craftsmanship. "I think it might be," Rebecca answered, a strange sadness washing over her. These weren't the records of a criminal mastermind, but the treasured memories of a man who had loved and perhaps lost. "Let's show these to Jack. He might recognize her." When confronted with the photographs, Jack's reaction was impossible to miss. A sharp intake of breath, a momentary closing of eyes before his features settled back into careful neutrality. "Sophia Rossi," he confirmed, refusing to touch the pictures Rebecca laid before him. "Donovan's wife, though they separated years before he disappeared. She left Oakwood Mills in 1985, couldn't stand the rumors about his business dealings." "Do you know where she is now?" Rebecca pressed. Jack's weathered hands gripped his coffee mug too tightly. "Last I heard, she was living in Cedar Rapids, about 50 miles west. Changed her name back to Rossi after the separation. Never remarried." The discovery shifted something in their precarious equilibrium. Sophia Rossi represented a connection to Donovan that existed outside the ledgers and hidden treasures. Someone who might understand the man rather than merely his crimes or possessions. That evening, after the children had gone home and Matthew was occupied with homework, Rebecca searched online for Sophia Rossi in Cedar Rapids. The results were sparse but promising. A mention in a community newsletter from the previous year, a listing for a small art gallery. She dialed the gallery's number with uncertain fingers. A woman answered, her voice carrying the slight musical quality of an Italian accent, softened by decades in the Midwest. "Rossi Gallery, how may I help you?" Rebecca hesitated, suddenly aware of the strangeness of her quest. "I'm looking for Sophia Rossi. My name is Rebecca Taylor. I currently own Frank Donovan's house in Oakwood Mills." The silence that followed stretched so long that Rebecca thought the call had dropped. Then softly, "How did you find me?" "Photographs hidden in the house, and information from someone who knew your husband." Another pause, shorter this time. "Ex-husband. And this person who knew Frank, does he have a name?" Rebecca weighed her response carefully. "Jack Miller." A sharp, bitter laugh echoed through the connection. "Of course, Jack Miller, still haunting Frank's shadow after all these years. Ms. Rossi, I'd like to meet with you. There are things happening in Oakwood Mills, people interested in your ex-husband's past. My son and I are caught in the middle of something we don't fully understand." The silence returned heavier than before. "You have a son, Matthew, he's 8. Sophia's voice softened. "Bring him with you, tomorrow afternoon, 3 o'clock. The address is on the gallery website." The line went dead before Rebecca could respond. Rebecca didn't tell Jack about the planned visit. His secretiveness about Donovan had created a small pocket of mistrust that she couldn't quite dismiss. Instead, she arranged for the other children to have a day off from the program and prepared Matthew for a special adventure the following day. The drive to Cedar Rapids took just under an hour, the landscape transforming from the dense woods surrounding Oakwood Mills to gentler, more open countryside. Matthew watched from the back seat, asking occasional questions about their mysterious destination. Is this about the treasure hunt? His perception cut through her vague explanations. Rebecca met his eyes in the rearview mirror. Sort of. We're meeting someone who might help us understand more about Mr. Donovan and why people are so interested in our house. Like Mayor Blackwood. Matthew's voice dropped to a near whisper at the name, as if speaking it might summon the man himself. Exactly like him. Rebecca forced lightness into her tone. It's like we're detectives solving a mystery. The gallery occupied a converted Victorian house on a quiet street lined with mature oaks. Rossi Gallery was painted in elegant script above the door, the windows displaying landscapes that captured the rolling hills and dramatic skies of the Midwest with surprising intensity. Inside, the space was airy and intimate, simultaneously walls painted soft white to showcase the artwork. A woman sat at a small desk in the corner, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a simple knot. She looked up as they entered her eyes, still striking despite the fine lines surrounding them, moving from Rebecca to Matthew with unconcealed interest. Sophia Rossi carried her 67 years with dignity, her posture straight, her movements deliberate as she rose to greet them. Rebecca Taylor and Matthew. Not a question, but an acknowledgement. Rebecca nodded oddly, nervous under the older woman's scrutiny. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us, Ms. Rossi. Sophia's attention remained fixed on Matthew, who returned her gaze with characteristic curiosity. You have kind eyes, young man, like someone else I once knew. She gestured toward a door at the back of the gallery. Come, we'll talk in my apartment upstairs, more private. The living space above the gallery reflected its owner, elegant, understated, with surprising warmth. Paintings similar to those displayed downstairs hung on the walls, all bearing Sophia's signature. She guided them to a small sitting area overlooking a garden courtyard, then disappeared briefly into the kitchen, returning with a tray of cookies and lemonade. Italian almond cookies. My grandmother's recipe, she explained as Matthew eyed them hopefully. Please help yourself. Once they were settled, Sophia's expression grew more serious. So you live in Frank's house, and you found things he left behind. Rebecca nodded, producing the wedding photo from her purse. We found this along with others, and his ledger. Sophia took the photograph with trembling fingers, her composure cracking slightly as she traced the image of her younger self. We were happy then, before Oakwood Mills, before he met Walter Blackwood and the others. The ledger contains evidence of illegal activities, Rebecca explained carefully, mindful of Matthew's attentive presence. Mayor Blackwood's name appears frequently. Sophia's laugh held no humor. Walter was Frank's protege, then his business partner, finally his betrayer. Frank trusted him, brought him into the inner circle. Walter repaid that trust by sleeping with Frank's mistress and stealing from their joint ventures. Rebecca glanced at Matthew, who was contentedly munching cookies while absorbing every word. The mayor seems desperate to find the ledger and anything else Donovan might have left behind. Of course he is. Sophia set the photograph down carefully, because Frank kept meticulous records of everything, every transaction, every favor, every betrayal. Blackwood's entire empire is built on foundations of Frank-laid connections Frank cultivated. Her dark eyes found Rebecca's. But that's not why you sought me out, is it? You want to know who Frank Donovan really was? Rebecca nodded, surprised by the woman's perception. Jack Miller refuses to explain his connection to your ex-husband. The townspeople speak of Donovan with fear. The mayor acts as if the house contains something far more valuable than just incriminating records. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, studying Matthew as he explored the room, examining the paintings with genuine interest. Frank Donovan was born Francesco Donatelli in a small village outside Naples. His family immigrated when he was 7. His father was a carpenter who taught him to work with his hands to appreciate beauty in wood grain and stone. His mother taught him ambition, the hunger to rise above their circumstances. She poured herself a glass of lemonade, her movements measured. Frank built his first legitimate business at 22, a furniture workshop that gained recognition for its craftsmanship. He expanded into real estate, then shipping. Somewhere along the way, he caught the attention of certain people in Detroit who saw his businesses as perfect vehicles for their less legitimate enterprises. He became a criminal, Rebecca supplied when Sophia paused. He became compromised, Sophia corrected gently. There's a difference. At first, he believed he could control their relationship, use their money to build something lasting while limiting his involvement in their operations. By the time he realized his mistake, extraction would have cost him everything, including possibly his life. Matthew had returned to the sitting area drawn by the story. Was he a bad person? He asked with characteristic directness. Sophia's expression softened. People are rarely all good or all bad, Matthew. Frank did things he wasn't proud of, made choices that hurt others. But he also helped people, gave opportunities to those society had discarded. She turned back to Rebecca. He built that mansion as a symbol of legitimacy, but designed it full of secrets, hidden spaces, concealed rooms. Even I didn't know them all. Rebecca leaned forward. And Jack Miller, where does he fit in this story? Something shuddered in Sophia's eyes. Jack Miller is... She hesitated, glancing at Matthew. Jack's connection to Frank is complicated. He was a detective in Detroit when Frank first came under investigation. Later, he moved to Oakwood Mills, supposedly to continue building a case. Instead, he and Frank developed an unusual relationship. Not friendship exactly, but a kind of mutual respect. Did they know each other well? Rebecca pressed, sensing Sophia was still withholding crucial information. Well enough that Frank trusted Jack with certain information. Well enough that Jack was one of the last people to see Frank alive. Sophia's gaze became distant. I left Frank because I couldn't bear to watch what he was becoming. But we remained connected. He called me the night he disappeared, sounding more at peace than he had in years. He said he'd found a way to make amends, to leave something good behind. And then he vanished, Rebecca finished. Sophia nodded. The official theory was that his criminal associates eliminated him. I never believed that. Frank was too careful, too prepared. Whatever happened that night was by his choice, not theirs. Matthew, who had been listening intently, spoke up. Do you think he's still alive, hiding somewhere? A sad smile crossed Sophia's lips. No, dear one. Frank is gone. But his legacy remains scattered throughout that house like puzzle pieces waiting to be assembled. Rebecca hesitated, then asked the question that had been forming since they discovered the ledger. Did Frank have any children? The change in Sophia was instant. A stiffening of posture, a flash of something raw and painful across her features. Why do you ask? Something the mayor said about Jack's real connection to Donovan. And there was a mention in the ledger about funds set aside for the boy. Sophia rose abruptly, moving to the window. Her reflection in the glass looked suddenly older, more fragile. Yes, Frank had a son. Not with me. I couldn't have children, one of life's cruel jokes. The boy was born to a woman Frank became involved with after our separation. Does Jack know about this son? Sophia's laugh was hollow. Oh yes, Jack knows very well. She turned back to face them. You should ask him about James Donatelli. Watch his face when you do. The revelation hung between them, heavy with implications Rebecca couldn't fully grasp. Before she could ask more, Sophia moved to a small writing desk and removed a key from a hidden compartment. Frank gave me this before everything fell apart. Said it opened something important in the house, something he wanted protected. She pressed the ornate brass key into Rebecca's palm. Perhaps it was meant for you all along. The drive back to Oakwood Mills passed in contemplative silence. Matthew eventually dozed off in the back seat, leaving Rebecca alone with her thoughts and the weight of Sophia's key in her pocket. The woman had shared much, but explained little, adding new questions without resolving existing ones. They arrived home to find Jack's truck into the driveway, an unexpected sight since they'd told him they would be gone for the day. Rebecca woke Matthew gently, her instincts suddenly alert. Stay close to me, buddy. Jack met them at the front door, his expression grim. You should have told me you were going to see Sophia. Rebecca stiffened, protective instincts flaring. I wasn't aware I needed your permission. Not permission, preparation. Jack ran a hand through his gray hair. frustration evident in the gesture. What did she tell you? Enough to know you've been less than honest. Rebecca ushered Matthew inside, keeping herself between him and Jack. Who is James Donatelli, Jack? The color drained from his weathered face. For a moment, he looked every day of his 68 years and more. She had no right. She had every right. This is my home now, my son's safety at stake. Rebecca's patience had reached its limit. No more half-truths. Either you tell me everything or our arrangement ends. Jack's gaze moved to Matthew, who watched the exchange with wide, concerned eyes. Not in front of the boy. Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. Matthew, can you go upstairs and start your reading assignment? I'll be up to check on you soon. Once Matthew had reluctantly departed, Jack's shoulders sagged, as if relieved of an invisible burden. James Donatelli was Frank Donovan's son, born in 1980 to his mistress, Catherine Walsh. And, Rebecca prompted when he paused. Jack's eyes met hers, pain and resignation battling in their depths. And he died in 1980, a car accident that killed his mother as well. Frank was devastated, withdrew from everyone, including his criminal associates. That's when things began to unravel for him. The revelation wasn't what Rebecca had expected. I'm sorry about the boy, but that doesn't explain your connection or why Sophia thought it was so important. Jack moved to the window, staring out at the darkening grounds. Because Frank blamed me for the accident. I was investigating him, putting pressure on Catherine to testify against him. She was fleeing from my team when her car went off the road. His voice had gone flat, emotionless. 5-year-old boy died because I pushed too hard. The weight of his confession settled between them, altering Rebecca's perception of the gruff ex-cop. That's why you've stayed close to the house all these years. Guilt. Jack turned, something hardening in his expression. Not just guilt, responsibility. Frank came to me after rage and grief pouring out of him. I expected him to kill me. Instead, he made me promise to protect whatever he left behind. His gaze swept the grand foyer. This place isn't just a house, Rebecca. It's a repository. Of secrets, yes, but also of redemption. Redemption for what? For both of us. Jack moved closer, lowering his voice. Frank used his criminal connections to help people Blackwood and his cronies had victimized. Provided medical care in that hidden room you found. Funded scholarships anonymously. Created escape routes for women trapped in abusive situations. A bitter smile crossed his face. I spent years trying to bring him down, only to discover he'd become some kind of twisted Robin Hood. Rebecca absorbed this, recalibrating her understanding of the man whose house she now occupied. And the ledger. The evidence against Blackwood. Insurance. Frank knew Blackwood was working to push him out, take control of their joint enterprises. The ledger was his protection. Until it wasn't. A cold certainty settled in Rebecca's stomach. Blackwood killed him, didn't he? Jack's silence was answer enough. After a moment, he nodded. I believe so, but believing isn't proving, and Blackwood covered his tracks well. The ledger is damning, but doesn't directly connect him to Frank's disappearance. Rebecca reached into her pocket, extracting Sophia's key. She gave me this, said Frank left it with her, that it opened something important in the house. Jack stared at the key, recognition flashing across his features. The vault, in the basement behind the wine cellar. We've been looking for the key for years. Jack had the grace to look uncomfortable. I've had help over the years. People Frank trusted, people who believed in what he was trying to accomplish. Rebecca closed her fingers around the key. No more secrets, Jack. From now on, full disclosure, or you're not welcome here. Agreed. Jack's response came without hesitation. But Rebecca, whatever's in that vault, Blackwood wants it badly enough to kill for it. We need to be careful. The next morning after Matthew had left for school, Rebecca and Jack descended into the basement flashlights, illuminating their path through the dusty wine cellar. The vault door was concealed behind a section of wine racks that swung outward on hidden hinges. The mechanism looked sophisticated for its era, a combination of old-world craftsmanship and modern security. Frank designed it himself, Jack explained as Rebecca inserted the key, combined his father's carpentry skills with high-end security technology. Nobody gets in without both the key and the knowledge. The lock turned with surprising ease given its age. Rebecca pushed the heavy door open to reveal a room roughly the size of a large walk-in closet. Unlike the rest of the basement, this space was immaculately preserved. Climate-controlled, dust-free, as if it had been sealed in time. Metal shelving lined the walls holding dozens of accordion files and leather-bound volumes similar to the ledger they had already found. A small desk occupied the center of the room, its surface bare, except for a single envelope addressed in elegant handwriting to the guardian of Haven House. Rebecca picked it up with trembling fingers. That's what I've been calling our after-school program, Dream Haven. But I never told anyone except the children. Frank always did have a flair for the dramatic, Jack murmured, scanning the shelves with obvious recognition. This is everything. His entire operation documented and preserved. Rebecca opened the envelope, unfolding pages of handwritten text dated April 17, 2000, 3 days before Donovan's disappearance. To whoever finds this letter, she read aloud, I entrust the legacy of Haven House and all it represents. If you are reading this, you have shown courage and determination in the face of opposition, qualities necessary for what lies ahead. She continued reading silently, her expression shifting from confusion to astonishment. When she looked up, her eyes were wide with disbelief. This is a will. He's leaving everything. The house, his legitimate businesses, a fortune in offshore accounts, to whoever turns the mansion into a haven for children in need. Jack nodded, unsurprised. After James died, Frank became obsessed with the idea of creating something lasting, something good from all his years of corruption. He believed the house would eventually find the right caretaker. But this is, Rebecca gestured helplessly at the documents. This is millions of dollars, properties across 3 states, and it says here the entire estate was placed in a trust managed by, she faltered, eyes darting to Jack. By me, he confirmed quietly, under my real name, James Miller. Frank named me trustee, his final twisted joke. The detective who caused his son's death entrusted with fulfilling his legacy. Rebecca sank into the desk chair, overwhelmed. Does Blackwood know about this? He knows Frank created a trust, doesn't know I control it or what conditions activate the distribution. He's been searching for the complete documentation for years, hence his desperation to control the house and everyone in it. The implications washed over Rebecca in dizzying waves. Dream Haven could become a reality beyond her modest ambitions, a fully funded permanent institution. Matthew's future would be secure, but the danger from Blackwood and his associates would increase exponentially once they realized what she had discovered. I need time to process this, she whispered, clutching the letter. Jack nodded. Take all the time you need. But Rebecca, now that we've opened the vault, the clock is ticking. Blackwood has surveillance on this place. He'll know something's changed. As if summoned by his warning, Rebecca's phone chimed with a text message. She glanced down to see a notification from Matthew's school. Please contact the office regarding your son. Cold dread pooled in her stomach. Matthew, we need to go, now. They raced up the basement stairs, the vault door swinging shut behind them, its secrets temporarily secured, but the danger suddenly terrifyingly real. The school's administrative office hummed with artificial calm, the methodical clicking of keyboards, the sanitized scent of industrial cleaners, the practiced neutral expressions of staff who had witnessed every variety of parental anxiety. Rebecca burst through the doors with Jack, close behind her, cycling through worst-case scenarios that left her breathless. The secretary glanced up, recognition flashing across her features. Ms. Taylor, thank you for coming so quickly. Where's Matthew? The question emerged sharper than Rebecca intended, stripped of social niceties by raw fear. The woman's expression softened with practiced sympathy. He's with Principal Davies. There was an incident during recess. She pressed a button on her desk phone. Sir Matthew Taylor's mother is here. Principal Davies emerged from his office moments later, a tall man with prematurely silver hair and eyes that had witnessed decades of childhood dramas. Ms. Taylor, please come in. Your companion can wait here. Jack stepped forward, authority emanating from his stance despite his age. I'm family. Where's the boy? Davies assessed Jack briefly before nodding. This way, please. Matthew sat hunched in an oversized chair, his small frame diminished further by the administrative surroundings. A purple bruise bloomed across his left cheekbone, his lower lip swollen on one side. When he looked up, his eyes filled with a complex mixture of relief, embarrassment, and lingering fear. Rebecca knelt before him, hands hovering near his injuries without touching. "What happened, baby?" "Mayor Blackwood's grandson," Matthew whispered. "Tyler said our house is full of dead bodies, that you're a gold digger trying to steal his grandpa's property." His voice strengthened with indignation. "Then he said Jack was a crazy old man who belonged in a nursing home." Davies cleared his throat uncomfortably. There was an altercation. Matthew punched Tyler Blackwood, who retaliated more forcefully. "And where is Tyler now?" Jack's voice carried a dangerous edge. "His grandfather picked him up 15 minutes ago." Davies shifted his weight authority, wavering beneath Jack's scrutiny. "Mayor Blackwood suggested we should discuss Matthew's living situation. He expressed concern about possible instability at home." The implication landed like a physical blow. Rebecca rose slowly, maternal protection crystallizing into something diamond hard. "My son was assaulted and you're questioning my parenting. The mayor mentioned certain legal complications regarding your after-school program." Davies retreated behind his desk, creating distance from her gathering fury. "Apparently there are concerns about proper licensing background checks. Dreamhaven's paperwork is being processed through proper channels." Rebecca's voice remained steady even as her hands trembled. "This is transparent intimidation, and you're facilitating it." Davies had the grace to look uncomfortable. "These accusations are coming from the mayor's office, Ms. Taylor. The school district must take them seriously." "Of course you must," Jack interjected, placing a steadying hand on Rebecca's shoulder. "Just as the State Department of Education must take seriously any evidence of preferential treatment based on political connections." He produced his phone screen displaying a recording app. "Mind repeating your concerns for the record?" The principal's discomfort escalated to visible alarm. "That won't be necessary. We're merely following protocol for any physical altercation between students." He turned to Matthew with forced gentleness. "You understand that hitting is never the answer, regardless of what was said." Matthew nodded solemnly, though a flicker of defiance remained in his eyes. "Yes, sir. Next time I'll use my words." "There won't be a next time," Rebecca stated firmly, helping Matthew gather his backpack. "Because my son won't be returning to an environment where he's bullied while administrators look the other way." Outside in the parking lot, Rebecca examined Matthew's face more carefully, cataloging each injury with mounting rage. "We're going to the police station to file a report." Jack shook his head. "Sheriff Thompson won't help. We need documentation from a neutral source." He checked his watch. "The urgent care center in the next county over. No connections to Blackwood." The 20-minute drive passed in tense silence, broken only by Matthew's occasional sniffles. At the clinic, a compassionate nurse photographed his injuries, and the attending physician documented everything in clinical detail, raising an eyebrow at Rebecca's insistence on copies of all records. "Custody dispute?" she asked discreetly while Matthew was distracted with a popsicle from the staff freezer. "Political dispute," Rebecca corrected. "We're having problems with local officials." Understanding dawned in the doctor's eyes. "I'll make these notes particularly thorough then, and if anyone calls asking about this visit, we'll require proper legal documentation before releasing any information." Armed with medical records, they returned to Dreamhaven as afternoon shadows stretched across the grounds. The house stood silent in watchful windows reflecting the declining sunlight like wary eyes. Rebecca's phone chimed with messages from concerned parents. Elena Martinez asking why Dreamhaven was closed, others wondering about tomorrow's schedule. "What do we do now?" Matthew asked once they were safely inside, the doors locked and security system armed. Jack's addition after their first encounter with intruders. Rebecca smoothed his hair, careful to avoid the tender spots. "Now we fight back. Properly." Jack moved methodically through the house, checking windows and doors with the precision of his law enforcement background. Blackwood's making his move. The school was just the opening salvo. Child Protective Services will be next, then building inspectors with emergency violations. Can he really take Matthew away? The possibility had haunted Rebecca's thoughts since the principal's office. Not legally, not permanently. Jack's certainty provided small comfort. But he can create enough bureaucratic chaos to make your life unbearable. Rebecca's phone rang. An unfamiliar local number. She answered cautiously, putting it on speaker. Ms. Taylor Sarah Chen from Chen Legal Services. The woman's voice carried the precise diction of someone accustomed to being recorded. I understand you've had some trouble with local officials. I'd like to offer my assistance. Rebecca exchanged a glance with Jack, suspicion immediately flaring. How did you hear about our situation? Sophia Rossi is my great aunt. A hint of warmth colored the professional tone. She called this morning, suggested you might need legal representation soon. Given what I know about Oakwood Mills governance, I agree with her assessment. Relief washed over Rebecca. We definitely need help. Today's events are just the beginning. I'm familiar with Mayor Blackwood's methods, Sarah confirmed. Can you meet at my office tomorrow morning? Bring any documentation you have. Medical records, permit, applications, communications with town officials. After arranging the meeting, Rebecca turned her attention to making dinner, the familiar ritual offering temporary distraction from their predicament. Matthew remained unusually quiet, his typical energy subdued by pain and confusion. When Rebecca tucked him in that night, he clutched her hand with unexpected strength. Are the bad guys getting it to win, Mom? The question pierced her carefully constructed facade of confidence. Rebecca perched on the edge of his bed, considering her response with the seriousness it deserved. Sometimes bad guys seem to have all the advantages. Money, connections, power. But there's something they always underestimate. What's that? Good people who refuse to give up. Rebecca gently touched his bruised cheek. People like us who know that homes aren't just places, they're promises we keep to each other. Matthew nodded solemnly, a wisdom beyond his years shadowing his expression. Like Dream Haven, it's a promise to kids who need somewhere safe. Exactly, and promises matter more than power. Rebecca kissed his forehead. That's why we'll win in the end. Morning brought fresh challenges. An official notice had been taped to their front door overnight. A cease and desist order for Dream Haven citing unauthorized childcare operations and multiple safety violations. Rebecca photographed the document before removing it, her hands steady despite the turmoil churning beneath her calm exterior. Jack arrived as she was calling parents to explain the temporary closure, his expression grimmer than usual. There's more. Town council's called an emergency session to discuss eminent domain proceedings against abandoned or improperly maintained historical properties. They can't just take the house, Rebecca protested, though uncertainty colored her words. They can try. Small-town government with no oversight can accomplish surprising things. Jack handed her a newspaper, the Oakwood Mills Gazette, featuring a front-page article about concerning activities at the former Donovan property, complete with quotes from anonymous, concerned citizens about strange comings and goings. Sarah Chen's office occupied a renovated Victorian in the neighboring town of Lakeside, close enough to serve Oakwood Mills residents, far enough to remain beyond Blackwood's immediate influence. The attorney herself defied Rebecca's expectations. Rather than the middle-aged professional she'd imagined Sarah was in her early 30s, with her great-aunt Sophia's striking features softened by youth and a modern sensibility evident in her crisp pantsuit and geometric jewelry. Blackwood's operating from a familiar playbook, Sarah observed after reviewing their documentation. Intimidation, bureaucratic pressure, public smear campaign, classic small-town power tactics. Can you help us fight it? Rebecca leaned forward, desperation bleeding through her composure. Sarah tapped her pen against a legal pad covered in precise notes. We can file for emergency injunctions against the cease and desist order, challenge the eminent domain proceedings as retaliatory, even pursue civil rights complaints if they continue targeting Matthew at school. And in practical terms, Jack interjected, legal battles take time we may not have. Sarah's smile carried a predatory edge. In practical terms, we fight fire with fire. Press coverage, social media pressure appeals to county and state officials who might be interested in small-town corruption. She turned to Rebecca. But first, you need to tell me everything about Frank Donovan's documentation, the trust Jack manages, and what exactly Blackwood is so desperate to conceal. For the next hour, Rebecca and Jack laid out the full complexity of their situation. The ledger, the vault, the trust conditions that would transfer millions in assets to Dream Haven if Rebecca successfully established it as a children's sanctuary. Sarah listened without interruption, her expression shifting from professional interest to personal investment. My great aunt always said Frank was more complex than people understood, she remarked when they finished. She'll be pleased to know his final act was one of redemption. Assuming we can access that redemption, Rebecca countered, Blackwood seems determined to bury us in legal challenges first. Sarah closed her notebook with decisive finality. Then we'll need to change the battlefield. Blackwood thrives in shadows and whispers. Let's drag this into the light. The strategy took shape over the next few hours. Legal filings combined with a coordinated media campaign, careful release of selected information from Donovan's records, and cultivation of allies within the community. Sarah made calls to contacts at regional newspapers and television stations, planting seeds for stories about small-town governance and historical preservation conflicts. Elena Martinez, Rebecca suggested as they discussed potential community supporters. Her restaurant is popular with locals, and she's been vocal about supporting Dreamhaven. Sarah added the name to their growing list. Perfect. We need faces and voices Blackwood can't easily dismiss. She hesitated before continuing. But you should understand, this approach will escalate the conflict before it resolves it. Blackwood won't surrender his secrets without a fight. I'm done hiding, Rebecca declared, the quiet certainty in her voice surprising even herself. Matthew deserves to see that standing up matters more than giving in. The following days unfolded with the strategic precision of a military campaign. Sarah filed motions challenging the cease and desist order, is securing a temporary stay that allowed Dreamhaven to reopen with restrictions. Jack called in favors from former law enforcement colleagues, arranging enhanced security measures and background checks on Blackwood's known associates. Rebecca threw herself into community outreach, starting with Elena Martinez. The restaurant owner listened to their abbreviated explanation, her expression growing increasingly indignant. My family has lived here for 3 generations, Elena declared when Rebecca finished. We've watched Blackwood consolidate power pressure small businesses, bully anyone who questions his authority. Count me in. Other allies emerged gradually. The high school librarian who'd clashed with Blackwood over budget cuts, a retired teacher who remembered Frank Donovan's anonymous scholarships for struggling students, parents who depended on Dreamhaven's affordable care. Small gestures of support accumulated casseroles delivered to Rebecca's door, volunteers offering to help with house repairs, neighbors driving past regularly to check for suspicious activity. The regional newspaper published a feature on Dreamhaven, presenting it as a heartwarming story of community renewal. The article mentioned the unfortunate administrative hurdles created by local government, alongside photos of smiling children and the gradually restored mansion. Blackwood declined to comment for the piece, a silence that spoke volumes. Sheriff Thompson, however, made his response clear. Police patrols passed the mansion, increased deputies taking photographs of visitors and noting license plates. Building inspectors appeared unannounced, citing Rebecca for violations that hadn't existed during previous inspections. Anonymous calls to Child Protective Services alleged unsanitary conditions and inadequate supervision at Dreamhaven. Each challenge was met with Sarah's legal expertise and the growing network of supporters. Documentation countered every false claim. Community members provided witness statements contradicting official reports. The children themselves became unwitting advocates, their obvious happiness and attachment to Dreamhaven evident to any objective observer. Through it all, Matthew remained resilient despite continuing friction at school. Other children, taking cues from Tyler Blackwood, maintained their distance, creating an isolation that manifested in quieter moments when he thought Rebecca wasn't watching. His shoulders would slump, his expression reflecting a weariness no 8-year-old should carry. You could send me to the school in Lakeside, he suggested one evening as Rebecca helped with homework. Miss Chen says they have space. Rebecca paused, pencil hovering over his math worksheet. Is that what you want? Matthew shrugged with forced casualness. Maybe it would make things easier, one less thing to fight about. The simple maturity of his offer cracked something in Rebecca's heart. She set the pencil down, turning his chair to face her directly. Listen to me, Matthew Taylor. We don't make decisions based on what's easiest for bullies to accept. We make them based on what's right. But no buts. This is our home. Dreamhaven is our purpose. If we start making compromises because it's easier, we'll never stop. Rebecca squeezed his shoulders gently. I'm proud of you for offering, but this is one burden you don't need to carry. The conversation lingered in Rebecca's thoughts that night as she sorted through Donovan's files from the vault. Each document revealed another facet of the man: meticulous financial records. Yes, but also personal notes about families he'd helped, children whose educations he'd funded anonymously, medical bills paid through untraceable channels. A pattern emerged slowly. Blackwood's rise within Donovan's organization coincided with increasing instances of extortion and intimidation. Where Donovan had balanced his criminal activities with surprising philanthropy, Blackwood pursued power without such ethical complications. His name appeared repeatedly in complaints Donovan had documented but never acted upon, as if collecting evidence for some future reckoning. Rebecca was so absorbed in the files she almost missed the first subtle creak of floorboards from the hallway. Dreamhaven stood silent around her, the children long gone. Matthew asleep upstairs, Jack having left hours earlier to investigate a lead on Blackwood's financial connections. She was supposed to be alone. Her body tensed, senses suddenly hyper-aware of every shadow and sound. The security system showed no breaches. Yet something had changed in the house's atmosphere, a disturbance in its familiar patterns of settling and breathing. Rebecca closed the file, silently slipping it into the desk drawer. Her phone lay just beyond reach on the library table, its screen dark and useless. The nearest panic button, Jack's installation, was beside the door, requiring her to cross exposed space to reach it. Another creak closer now, deliberate footsteps approaching with measured patience. Rebecca's mind raced through options, each less appealing than the last. Hide beneath the desk, too obvious. Call out to confront the intruder, too dangerous with Matthew asleep upstairs. Her gaze fell on the fireplace poker, a cast-iron implement she'd restored herself, its weight substantial in her hands, as she silently retrieved it from the stand. She positioned herself to beside the door, heart pounding so violently she feared it might betray her location. The footsteps paused outside the library. Rebecca held her breath, muscles coiled for whatever came next. The door swung open slowly, revealing a silhouette backlit by the dim hallway light. Tall, broad-shouldered, unmistakably male. Rebecca swung the poker without hesitation, aiming for the intruder's shoulder rather than head, wanting to incapacitate rather than kill. The figure moved with unexpected agility, catching her wrist mid-swing and twisting until the weapon clattered to the floor. "Ms. Taylor," Mayor Blackwood's voice carried no surprise, only mild disappointment. "I'd hoped we could have a civilized conversation." The overhead lights flicked on, revealing Blackwood in an immaculate suit, despite the late hour, flanked by two men, one she recognized as Andrew from their previous encounter, the other unfamiliar but equally menacing in his expensive attire and cold eyes. "Breaking and entering doesn't strike me as civilized," Rebecca countered, backing away until the desk pressed against her thighs. "How did you get past the security system?" Blackwood's smile never reached his eyes. "Small towns have their advantages. Everyone knows everyone, including the technicians who install home security." He gestured toward a chair. "Please sit. This doesn't need to be unpleasant." Rebecca remained standing. "My son is sleeping upstairs, and will remain undisturbed if our business concludes efficiently." Blackwood settled into an armchair without waiting for permission, his companions positioning themselves near the door, blocking her escape route. "I understand you've been reviewing Frank's more personal records." Ice formed in Rebecca's veins. They were being watched more closely than she'd realized. "I'm learning about the house's history." Natural curiosity. "Natural, perhaps. Advisable, we'll say." Blackwood spread his hands in a gesture of regretful warning. "History can be dangerous, especially when improperly interpreted by amateurs. Like records of your early work with Donovan, your gradual takeover of his operations, the people who disappeared when they became inconvenient." Rebecca kept her voice steady despite the fear constricting her throat. Something dangerous flickered across Blackwood's features, a momentary crack in the polished veneer. Allegations without context or understanding. Frank was a complicated man who made enemies. Many of those disappearances were self-preservational relocations. And Frank himself, did he relocate too? The mayor studied her with new intensity. "You're bolder than I anticipated. Most single mothers prioritize security over principles when their children's welfare is at stake." The threat, though veiled, crystallized Rebecca's resolve. "My son's welfare includes growing up with integrity, seeing his mother stand against bullies rather than submit to them. Admirable if impractical, Blackwood leaned forward, dropping pretenses. I'll be direct, Ms. Taylor. There are dark documents in Frank's possession that could create certain complications for Oakwood Mills development plans. As mayor, I have a responsibility to protect this town's future. By burying its past, Rebecca challenged, by managing transition appropriately. His tone hardened. Tomorrow morning, the town council will vote on eminent domain proceedings against your property. The measure will pass unanimously. You'll be offered fair market value, substantially more than you paid, and given 30 days to vacate. Rebecca fought to keep her expression neutral. That seems premature considering the legal challenges already filed. Legal challenges require functioning law firms. Blackwood examined his manicured nails with affected casualness. It's unfortunate about Ms. Chen's office. Electrical fires can be so devastating to historical buildings with outdated wiring. Horror bloomed in Rebecca's chest. You wouldn't. Of course not. I'm merely commenting on the unfortunate frequency of such accidents. Blackwood rose smoothly. Consider my generous offer, Ms. Taylor. Enough money to start fresh somewhere more suitable for a single mother and troubled child. Alternative scenarios become increasingly uncomfortable for everyone involved. The men departed as methodically as they'd arrived, leaving no evidence of their intrusion except the lingering scent of expensive cologne and the trembling in Rebecca's hands. She waited until headlights disappeared down the driveway before racing upstairs to check on Matthew, relief washing through her at the sight of his peaceful sleep, undisturbed by the threat that had just walked through their home. Rebecca's fingers shook as she dialed Jack's number, the call going straight to voicemail. She tried Sarah next, receiving a groggy but immediate response. Blackwood was here, she whispered, fear of waking Matthew overriding the urge to scream. In the house with two men. They threatened you. Something about an electrical fire at your office. Sarah's voice sharpened instantly. Are you and Matthew safe? For now, they left after delivering their message. Don't stay there tonight, Sarah advised urgently. Pack essentials and go somewhere Blackwood wouldn't expect. I'll handle my office security. What about Jack? I can't reach him. A pause stretched across the connection. I'll make some calls, see if anyone's heard from him. Just focus on getting Matthew to safety. Rebecca moved with quiet efficiency, packing backpacks with essentials while formulating a plan. They couldn't go to a local hotel. Too obvious, too vulnerable. Friends in town might face retaliation for sheltering them. Jack's cottage was likely watched. An idea formed as she gently woke Matthew, keeping her explanation simple. We're going on a special adventure tonight, buddy, like a spy mission. His sleepy confusion transformed to wide-eyed alertness. Because of the bad guys. Smart boy, Rebecca confirmed, helping him into jeans and a sweatshirt. We need to disappear for a little while. They slipped out through the kitchen door, avoiding windows facing the main road. Rebecca's car remained in the driveway, too conspicuous for their escape. Instead, they crept through the overgrown gardens toward the back of the property where the caretaker's cottage stood dark and silent. Jack kept an old pickup truck behind the cottage for gardening and maintenance, its faded paint and dented fenders rendering it practically invisible in the rural community where such vehicles were commonplace. The key hung on a nail inside the cottage's back door, accessible through the hidden spare key Jack had shown her months earlier. 20 minutes later, they were heading west on back roads, Matthew drifting back to sleep in the passenger seat. Rebecca drove with singular focus, her destination clear in her mind. Sophia Rossi's gallery in Cedar Rapids. The older woman had offered understanding when they needed it most. Rebecca prayed she would offer sanctuary now. The gallery was dark when they arrived shortly after midnight, but lights glowed warmly in the apartment above. Rebecca hesitated only briefly before knocking on the private entrance door, Matthew leaning drowsily against her side. Sophia opened the door wearing a silk robe, her silver-streaked hair loose around her shoulders. Understanding bloomed in her eyes before Rebecca could explain. Come inside quickly. The apartment welcomed them with the same quiet elegance as before, though now it offered something more precious. Safety, however temporary. Sophia bustled about preparing tea and a makeshift bed for Matthew on the living room sofa, her movements efficient despite the late hour. Blackwood came to the house, Rebecca explained once Matthew had fallen asleep again. He knows about the records threatened, Sarah's office said the council's voting on eminent domain tomorrow. Sophia's expression hardened, the resemblance to her great niece suddenly pronounced. Walter always was efficient when cornered. Frank underestimated that quality until it was too late. I can't reach Jack. I'm worried Blackwood might have. Jack can take care of himself. Sophia's certainty offered small comfort. He's survived Walter's attention for 25 years. Rebecca clutched her mug, the warmth failing to penetrate the chill that had settled in her core. What do they want? What could possibly be worth all this? The intimidation, the threats, potentially even murder. Sophia's gaze drifted to the window streetlights, casting her profile in stark relief. Power, primarily. The documentation in Frank's vault could destroy careers, trigger federal investigations, unravel decades of carefully constructed networks. It seems disproportionate for small-town politics. Oakwood Mills is merely the visible portion. Sophia turned back to Rebecca. Walter's influence extends throughout the county with connections to state officials and beyond. The development plans he mentioned aren't just about local prosperity. They involve major infrastructure contracts, resource rights, federal funding. And Donovan's records would expose the corruption behind those deals, Rebecca concluded. Sophia nodded gravely. Along with evidence of more serious crimes Walter committed during his rise, Frank documented everything his own protection, becoming Walter's greatest vulnerability. The conversation paused as Matthew stirred briefly before settling back into sleep. Rebecca watched her son, the weight of their situation pressing down with renewed force. I don't know what to do, she admitted, the confession emerging as barely more than a whisper. Fight and risk everything, including Matthew's safety. Surrender and lose our home, betray what Dreamhaven could become. Sophia reached across the table, her weathered hand covering Rebecca's. When Frank faced impossible choices, he would ask himself one question. What story do I want written when I'm gone? Morning arrived with slanting golden light and the distant sounds of a town awakening. Rebecca had dozed fitfully on an armchair near Matthew, nightmares intruding whenever sleep deepened. Her phone remained silent. No word from Jack or Sarah, increasing her fears with each passing hour. Sophia prepared breakfast with quiet efficiency, setting plates of eggs and toast before them. Sarah called while you were sleeping. She's fine, her office is secure. She'll meet us at 9. Relief loosened some of the tension in Rebecca's shoulders. And Jack? Still no contact. Sophia's neutrality couldn't completely mask her concern, but she's made inquiries with contacts in law enforcement. Sarah arrived precisely at 9, her professional appearance belying the circumstances. She carried a sleek laptop and several expandable files, her expression somber but determined. Blackwood moved faster than anticipated, she reported, spreading documents across Sophia's dining table. Emergency town council session is scheduled for 11 this morning. The agenda includes both the eminent domain vote and a resolution condemning Dreamhaven as a public nuisance. Can they really take our home that easily? Matthew asked, his small voice cutting through the adult conversation with painful clarity. Sarah considered him with gentle seriousness. They can try, Matthew, but we have something they don't expect. What's that? Hope flickered across his bruised face. The truth. Sarah turned her laptop screen toward Rebecca, displaying a carefully constructed presentation. I've been preparing this since we first met. Evidence from Donovan's records, witness statements, financial analyses showing patterns of corruption, all ready for distribution to state authorities, media outlets, and federal agencies. Rebecca scanned the material with growing appreciation for Sarah's thoroughness. Will it be enough? Combined with this, yes. Sarah produced a flash drive from her pocket. Jack sent this electronically at 4:30 this morning. Time-stamped video evidence of Blackwood's visit to your home last night, complete with threats and admissions of planned interference with legal proceedings. Jack recorded it. Rebecca's mind raced to understand. How? The security system he installed includes hidden cameras in common areas. Sarah explained. Feeds to an off-site server he controls. Apparently he anticipated something like this. Where is he now? Sarah's hesitation spoke volumes. The message came through an automated system. No direct contact since. Rebecca absorbed this with grim understanding. So we have the evidence. What's our next move? We attend the council meeting. Sarah's strategy unfolded with practiced precision. Present our evidence publicly before they can vote. Have media present to document reactions. Force the issue into daylight where Blackwood can't control the narrative. Sophia, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. Walter will have contingency security to prevent disruptions, which is why we need multiple points of pressure. Sarah opened another file. Elena Martinez has organized community members to attend. I've arranged for reporters from 3 regional outlets to be present. And she paused, a small smile playing at her lips. A representative from the state attorney general's office will coincidentally be in attendance, following up on anonymous tips about governance irregularities. The plan took shape around Rebecca, like armor being assembled piece by piece, legal public strategic protection against Blackwood's machinations. Yet uncertainty lingered a shadow across her tentative hope. What about Matthew? I can't bring him into that environment, but I can't leave him unprotected either. He'll stay with me, Sophia declared with quiet authority. No one associates me with your fight yet. My gallery has an excellent security system, and I still know how to use Frank's old revolver if necessary. Matthew straightened at this curiosity, temporarily overriding anxiety. You have a gun, Sophia winked at him, tension breaking momentarily. I was married to a complicated man, little one. I learned to protect myself in various ways. The town hall of Oakwood Mills stood as it had for a century, a red brick testament to small-town governance, its facade projecting stability and tradition while concealing the shifting power dynamics within. By 10:30, the parking lot had filled with unexpected vehicles, news vans, unfamiliar sedans bearing county and state government plates, and dozens of local cars belonging to citizens rarely seen at municipal proceedings. Rebecca entered flanked by Sarah and Elena, their small procession drawing immediate attention from the security personnel stationed at the entrance. Sheriff Tara Thompson intercepted them, his expression wavering between official sternness and personal uncertainty. Ms. Taylor, this is a closed session. Sarah stepped forward, credentials at the ready. Public notice requirements under state law mandate open attendance for eminent domain proceedings, Sheriff. Unless you'd like to explain to the Attorney General's representative why you're selectively enforcing access. Thompson's gaze shifted to the gathering crowd, calculation evident in his eyes. After a moment, he stepped aside with visible reluctance. Council members already seated. Public comment period is limited to 3 minutes per person. The council chamber hummed with unusual energy. Rows of seats filled with unfamiliar faces, cameras positioned discreetly along the walls, an atmosphere of anticipation rather than the usual bureaucratic torpor. At the elevated dais, 5 council members and Mayor Blackwood watched their entrance with varying degrees of discomfort. Blackwood himself maintained his practiced public persona, though Rebecca detected the momentary tightening around his eyes when he spotted Sarah. He gavelled the meeting to order, with forced joviality, proceeding through preliminary matters with efficiency clearly meant to reach the eminent domain vote quickly. Sarah whispered instructions as they took seats in the front row. Let him establish the agenda. When he opens discussion on the eminent domain resolution, that's when we make our move. Rebecca nodded, scanning the room for potential allies and obstacles. Her gaze caught on a figure at the back, a middle-aged woman in a severe suit, her attention focused entirely on Blackwood with an intensity that suggested professional scrutiny rather than civic interest. The Attorney General's representative, Rebecca, guessed. Moving to item 3, Blackwood announced that after dispensing with routine approvals, Resolution 426 regarding acquisition of historically significant property under eminent domain statutes. The property in question, commonly known as the Donovan Mansion, has fallen into disrepair and represents both a safety hazard and an opportunity for community development. Sarah squeezed Rebecca's arm. Their cue. They rose simultaneously, Sarah raising her hand with confident authority. Point of order, Mr. Mayor. Before discussion proceeds, we request opportunity to present evidence directly relevant to this resolution. Blackwood's smile remained fixed, though something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Public comment will be permitted after council discussion. Ms. Chen, Sarah Chen, legal counsel for Rebecca Taylor and Dreamhaven Foundation. She stepped into the center aisle. And the evidence we wish to present involves multiple violations of state and federal law, including documented instances of intimidation, harassment, and conspiracy to interfere with legal proceedings, all directly connected to this resolution. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Cameras swiveled toward the confrontation. Blackwood's knuckles whitened around the gavel. That's a serious accusation, counselor. One that should be addressed through proper channels, not disruptive grandstanding. We agree completely. Sarah's smile carried predatory certainty, which is why representatives from those proper channels are present today. She gestured toward the woman in the severe suit who nodded in confirmation. Blackwood's composure slipped momentarily a crack in the foundation of his authority. Before he could respond, the chamber doors burst open with a crash that drew every eye. Jack Miller stood framed in the doorway, his weathered face bearing fresh bruises, one arm supported by a makeshift sling. Behind him stood two state police officers in full uniform, their presence sending immediate ripples of alarm through the council members. "Sorry I'm late," Jack announced, his voice carrying clearly despite his obvious pain. "Had an unexpected detour courtesy of some associates of Mayor Blackwood. Fortunately, the state police were very interested in my evidence regarding corruption in Oakwood Mills governance." The chamber erupted in chaotic noise. Exclamations, questions, the frantic gaveling of Blackwood attempting to restore order. Through it all, Rebecca felt a strange calm descend as if watching the scene from a distance. The carefully constructed reality Blackwood had maintained for decades was unraveling, thread by thread, exposure to light dissolving what shadows had protected. Sarah seized the momentum, connecting her laptop to the chamber's projection system, despite Thompson's half-hearted attempts to intervene. "Ladies and gentlemen, council members, members of the press, what you're about to see documents a systematic pattern of corruption, intimidation, and abuse of power spanning 25 years. As evidence flooded the screens, financial records, witness statements, and finally the damning video of Blackwood's midnight threats in Rebecca's library, the mayor's facade crumbled completely. He rose from his seat, jabbing an accusatory finger toward Rebecca. "This woman is a trespasser. The Donovan property and everything it contains legally belongs to the town." Desperation edged his voice, the polished politician giving way to something rawer and more dangerous. Frank Donovan was a criminal who disappeared owing millions in taxes. His assets were forfeited by law. "Interesting theory," Sarah countered smoothly, producing a document from her file. "Except that Frank Donovan's estate was legally transferred to a private trust before his disappearance, with all tax obligations satisfied. The trust documentation and validation certificates certified by the state courts 15 years ago." The attorney from the AG's office approached the council dais badge displayed. "Mayor Blackwood, in light of the evidence presented, I'm requesting you step down from presiding over this meeting while we conduct preliminary inquiries." Blackwood's gaze darted around the chamber, seeking allies, and finding only uncertainty or outright abandonment. Council members edged away from him, physically and metaphorically, their self-preservation instincts overriding decades of loyalty. When his eyes met Rebecca's, something passed between them, a recognition that transcended their conflict. In that moment, she saw not the powerful mayor or corrupt businessman, but a man facing the collapse of his carefully constructed world. For all his crimes, there was something almost pitiable in his desperation. Rebecca rose slowly, silence falling as she prepared to speak. "I came to Oakwood Mills seeking a fresh start, a home where my son could heal and grow. What I found instead was a community wounded by decades of manipulation and fear." Her gaze swept the chamber, connecting with the residents who had initially shunned her, but now watched with dawning understanding. Dreamhaven was never just about creating a safe space for children. It was about reclaiming the promise this town once held. Before power became more important than people, before history was buried beneath convenience. She turned back to Blackwood, who stood frozen behind the dais. "Frank Donovan left a legacy meant to heal the damage he helped create. I'm offering Oakwood Mills the same opportunity, not vengeance but restoration. The chance to rebuild with transparency and genuine community welfare as its foundation." The chamber remained hushed as her words settled, their impact visible in thoughtful expressions and straightening shoulders. Citizens who had entered as observers began transforming into participants, possibility, replacing resignation in their collective consciousness. The state police approached Blackwood, their purpose evident in their stance and expression. The mayor glanced once more around the chamber, at the council members already distancing themselves, the media capturing every moment, the citizens witnessing his downfall, before squaring his shoulders in a final display of dignity. "This isn't over," he stated simply, allowing himself to be escorted from the chamber without further resistance. The aftermath unfolded in waves over subsequent hours and days. Sheriff Chad Thompson resigned the following morning. Two council members followed suit within the week. State investigators descended on municipal offices, boxes of documents emerging in the arms of somber-faced officials. Dreamhaven remained open throughout its services, expanding, as parents previously afraid of Blackwood's disapproval brought their children to the program. The cease and desist order was formally rescinded by the interim town leadership, replaced with official recognition of the foundation's value to the community. Jack recovered slowly from the injuries sustained during his detour, broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder, courtesy of Blackwood's associates who had attempted to prevent his evidence from reaching authorities. He maintained his residence in the caretaker's cottage, though his role evolved from silent guardian to active partner in Dreamhaven's development. 1 month after the confrontation at Town Hall, Rebecca stood in the grand foyer of the mansion, no longer Donovan's house nor even Dreamhaven, but simply home. Children's laughter echoed from the East Wing where an art class was underway. Matthew's voice rose occasionally above the others, confidence replacing the caution that had characterized his early days in Oakwood Mills. Jack entered through the front door without knocking, a habit Rebecca had stopped attempting to correct. The last of the trust paperwork came through. Everything's officially transferred to the foundation now. Rebecca accepted the envelope he offered, though its contents, confirmation of millions in assets now under her direction, seemed almost abstract compared to the tangible achievements already realized. "Have you decided whether to accept the board position?" Jack's weathered features arranged themselves into what passed for a smile in his typically stoic expression. "Figured you could use someone who knows where all the bodies aren't buried despite the rumors." Rebecca allowed herself a small laugh at the dark humor. Sophia accepted too. She's moving back to Oakwood Mills next month, taking over the old Pearson Gallery on Main Street. "Town's changing." Jack's observation carried no judgment, merely acknowledgement. "For the better, I think." Rebecca moved to the window, watching Matthew lead a group of children in some elaborate game across the front lawn, the same ground where protesters had once gathered, where whispers of curses had circulated. Homes remember the people who lived in them, but they don't have to be defined by the past. Jack joined her at the window, his presence solid and reassuring. Frank would have approved of all of it. "I hope so." Rebecca's fingers traced the ornate woodwork framing the window, craftsmanship from another era preserved through decades of neglect and now restored to its original beauty. "Everyone deserves the chance to leave something better than they found it." Outside, Matthew looked up mid-game, spotting her in the window. His smile, unguarded, luminous with childhood's resilience, beamed across the distance between them. He waved enthusiastically before returning to his friends, secure in the knowledge that his home stood solid around him, its foundations strengthened, rather than weakened by the storms it had weathered. Rebecca waved back, a simple gesture containing complex promise of protection, of persistence, of the quiet courage required to build sanctuary from ruins. Dreamhaven had begun as desperate gamble, a last chance grasp at stability for a struggling mother and wounded son. It had transformed into something far greater, not just a haven for children, but a redemption story spanning generations, connecting past sins to future possibilities through the unexpected grace of second chances. The mansion settled around her with the comfortable sigh of an old structure adapting to new purpose. Its secrets had been revealed, its shadows illuminated, its legacy reclaimed from those who would have buried it beneath convenient development. Like the children it now sheltered, it had been given the opportunity to become its best self rather than remain defined by its worst moments. Some called it miracle, this transformation of tragedy into triumph. Rebecca knew better. Miracles implied divine intervention, mysterious forces beyond human understanding. What had happened here was simpler and more profound. People choosing courage over comfort, truth over convenience, restoration over destruction. The most powerful magic possible, ordinary hearts refusing to surrender to fear.